Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Amina and absolutely love it if you could subscribe to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going through how to start a successful podcast. I started a podcast, me and my husband have a podcast. We started it about 3 or 4 months ago maybe, and we have approximately 19 episodes, I think 18 or 19 episodes out now. We really enjoy recording new episodes every single week. The name is Oh By The Way Pod, so please check it out if you haven't checked it out already. It's available on all platforms, and it's a continued conversation, so we continue talking about what it is that we talk about as a married couple during the week. Just our conversations about politics, the world, family, life, news, whatever it is that we talked about that week, we kind of bring it onto the podcast and chat about it a bit more. So I think it's pretty interesting, so do check it out. I've spoken to some people that are in the charts, so those that are doing really well, and I've also spoken to people that have just started up, and I've compiled a list of things and kind of subheadings of things that you need to consider when you are thinking of starting a podcast. At the moment, podcasts have the greatest listening time and audience retention. So the average YouTube video is listened and watched for about 2 to 3 minutes, if that, whereas the average podcast is listened to at least for about an hour. So you can see how advertisers really do appreciate podcasts a lot more than YouTube videos nowadays. So if you are someone who is thinking about starting a podcast, now is that time to do it. Now is the time to start a podcast if you're thinking about it. It's still a very new area, even though you might think there are loads of podcasts out there. Compared to YouTubers or compared to other social media platforms, podcasts haven't even touched the surface yet. I'm going to split this video up into the following categories. So firstly, topic; second, audience; style; the title; the schedule; time; editing; mic and gear; and platforms. So I will leave the timestamps down below for all of those different steps. So firstly, you need to be able to define a topic. So what is a topic that you are thinking of discussing? Are you going to discuss current affairs? Are you going to discuss a book? Are you going to be sort of like a book review podcast? Are you going to discuss news? Are people going to send you dilemmas and you're going to discuss those? What is it that you are discussing? You need to first of all think of a topic, and I think this is pretty much the first thing that you need to start off with, and it's the most basic starting. The second thing is the audience. Now you need to consider them. What audience do you want to attract? Because naturally you're not going to attract everyone. What issues or problems will your audience potentially have? Will there be young people that want to just hear from someone older? What value is your show going to bring, and what value are you going to give to your audience? Why are they going to be interested in your podcast? So you really need to think about this quite a bit and kind of define what it is you're talking about and who your audience will be, because that will really help with the rest. Now there are a number of different podcast styles. Now you can mix and match, to be honest, but a lot of the time really staying consistent and sticking to one style just means your audience knows what to expect. So the most popular nowadays are the interview style, when the host interviews different celebrities or business people or whatever it is the topic is about. They'll interview people. That's a very common one. Another common one is a conversational one, so that's a bit like my podcast, so people just chatting about something. So they might be by themselves, they might be with a friend, they might be just discussing anything, and that's at the moment a very popular type of podcast. If you have something to say, you can do well on a podcast. And another really popular one is teaching. So you can teach anything. You can teach your audience about any topic that you wish, any topic that you feel like you have an interest in. There will definitely be someone out there that wants to listen to that. There are loads of other styles of podcasts as well. You just have to find what defines you and what you'd feel comfortable with and what you can continue and maintain on your particular podcast. So if you think about it, something like an interview style podcast requires the person that you're interviewing to be available, and you need to schedule that, and that requires maybe a bit more work than a conversational one. For example, like me and my husband, we literally just sit down, take a seat and start talking about what we were talking about that week, and it's a lot easier to kind of coordinate and maintain a weekly schedule. If you are thinking about what style, also think about how easy it is to actually execute. If you want to post a podcast every single week, do you think it is feasible? Do you think that's something that you can actually do? The next thing that you need to consider is your title. So now that you know what you're doing, now that you know who you're trying to attract, you need to think about what your title is going to be. Now there are a few key ingredients to make a good title. The first is that it needs to be easy to remember, easy to spell, and easy to say. Because bear in mind that when people tell others and share others about this podcast, they need to be able to say, oh my gosh, I heard this podcast, it's called Oh By The Way, and they need to be able to relay that to someone, and there shouldn't be any confusion about what the word is, what the terms are. Try to make it short and snappy. We spoke to a ton of people and asked them, what do you think about this name? What do you think about this name? And whenever we said, oh, by the way, they were like, oh, I really love that. And that just made us think, oh, you know what, that's a good name. And a good way of picking a name is to just use common expressions. So for example, there's a podcast that's called Back of the Net, and it's a football podcast, and that makes sense, Back of the Net, football podcast. My brother has a podcast called Under the Tooth, and I'll leave the link for it down below as well. And he's a dentist, and he does this podcast with his 2 other friends, so there's 3 of them that are hosting this podcast, and it's obviously about dentistry and everything to do with kind of teeth essentially, and dental hygiene, etc. It's called Under the Tooth, and again, it's a very clever name, nice and short, snappy, and just gets the message across to the person that's receiving. The next thing to consider is the schedule. So how often do you actually want to post, and how often do you think you will post? Now, the recommended is once a week. So posting 1 time a week is the minimum. It allows people to be engaged to you. Every single week they hear your voice, and it's something nice for them to be able to come back to once a week. But the key thing with scheduling is that you need to be consistent and you need to stick to it. Whatever you choose, whether you choose once a week, twice a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month, you need to stick to that. You need to get people that are loyal to your podcast, that are going to keep on coming back, and that expect a podcast on this specific day at this specific time. I mean, for the most part, we've been really good, but there have been a couple of weeks where we haven't posted. And you know, life happens, and it's totally okay to just skip a week or 2, I guess. But for the most part, we always post on Sundays in the evening. The podcast is there at the start of the week for you to listen to during the rest of the week. And it's just something that people expect. We find that as soon as we put our podcast up, within half an hour, there's 30 or 40 people that have already listened to it, even though it might be like Sunday night, because they do expect it there, so they're coming there to check. Moving on to time, so the duration. How long should your podcast be? On average, a good podcast is at least an hour long, or around that ballpark. Anything around 45 minutes to about an hour and a half is usually how long an audience tend to listen to a podcast. Now, like I said, this is very long. Would you ever sit there and watch this video if it was 1 hour long? No way. I wouldn't even watch it myself. But the fact that we listen to podcasts that are over an hour long and we maintain that concentration for that long shows how much potential podcasts actually have in terms of kind of money making or advertising as well in the future. A good way of thinking about it is, how long is the average commute time in your city? In London, on average, people travel 45 minutes to about an hour and a bit. So having a podcast that's 1 hour long means that they start it when they leave the house and they can finish it by the time they get to work, or they can start it and then they can finish it on their way back from work. So they definitely will finish it in that day. You also want to think about whether you want your podcast to be edited or unedited. Now, our podcast is completely unedited, so there's not a single thing that we touch except for adding the intro music. That is all we do. And I think there was one time that a fire alarm went off and we had to run out and sort it out and stuff, so we obviously took that bit out. That's it. Like, we've literally never edited anything. A cough, a sneeze, we leave it in, purely because firstly, a podcast that's 1 hour long requires a lot of editing if you have to go through it and edit it properly, if you're editing it yourself. And also, we like to just keep it unedited because our podcast is a conversation and we're just showing what our normal conversations would be like. There's a lot of ums and ahs, and that's completely fine. I think that's how a normal conversation is anyway. So it's quite nice that our podcasts are completely unedited. It just means that we sit there for an hour, we record for an hour, and then it's gone, it's posted, and there's no more work to do. So it's a lot less work than, for example, a YouTube video, which requires a lot more editing. So this is something that someone told me, and this person has a very successful podcast, and I didn't really realize this before. We didn't actually do this. When you post your first podcast, try to post 3 podcasts in one go. So try to post the first 3 podcasts when you first post, before you advertise, because what happens is people tend to enjoy podcasts. When they've listened to one, they then want to binge and listen to another one and listen to another one. And if you've only posted 1, then that's all they have. So if you post 3 at the same time, they can then binge and watch all and listen to all 3 at the same time. And the other thing that he said was that the algorithm, so there is an algorithm with podcasts as well actually, the algorithm really likes channels or podcast channels where people are going backwards. So what you need to do is when you're in your podcast and you're recording, try to refer back to previous podcasts. So try to say, in podcast number 1 we talked about da da da. Let people go back to podcast number 1. I think this becomes more important when you've got maybe like 100 podcasts and people are joining at the 100th one. They haven't listened to the other one, so the algorithm really likes it when people go back and listen to old podcasts. So try to find a way of embedding that into your podcast somehow. Moving on to editing. Now, to edit your podcast, like I said, we use very minimal editing. There are lots of softwares that you can use. You can use Final Cut Pro. I can't remember which one we use. I think it's called Audacity or something. I'll leave it down below. But there's so many different software. I think it really depends on you, your budget. The one that we use is free, whereas Final Cut Pro obviously you have to pay for, so it really depends on kind of what level of complexity you want, but you should be able to find a software that's complete. Moving on to mic and gear, so sound. This is probably, I should have done this number 1. This is probably the most important thing that you should consider when thinking about a podcast. If your sound quality isn't good, then people are going to drop off very quickly. I'll show you what gear we use. So we use this, it's a Blue Snowball microphone. Plug it into your computer, it's a USB port, and it just sits on the table like this. So it's got the legs like that. It's nice and simple. Literally just plug it in, that plugs in, and you start recording. There's nothing more that, with this one, as you can see, it's circular and it has these vents all the way through. So I usually sit on one side and my husband sits on one side, and we're probably about, I would say, about less than 30 centimeters away, and it's perfect. And that's the sound, and we don't edit the sound at all, and this does the job. And I think this is probably £30 or £40. I can't remember how much this was. However, having said that, you do not even need this. If you have a phone, if you have an iPhone, an Android, any phone that you use, you can record using the microphone from that. So if you put that on your table, you can record, or you can even hold it because no one can see, then you can record your microphone using the phone's microphone, and that tends to be really good. We recorded one podcast with my phone and it was perfect quality. I don't think anyone noticed that it wasn't with this. So yeah, you don't even need to spend a single penny. All you need is a phone, which we all have. The last thing that you need to know is platforms. What platform to use? Now, I get asked this all the time. How do you post it on iTunes and Spotify and all the other platforms? Well, you don't actually need to. If you sign up to Anchor.com, so I'll leave the link for that down below as well. Anchor, it's completely free. Just sign up to it and then you post your first podcast. So as long as you post your first podcast, after that it takes a couple of days, but they do upload all of your podcasts directly to every single podcast platform completely for free. So Spotify, like I said, all the big ones, all the small ones, they post it to all of them automatically. All you need to do is post it onto Anchor, and that's about it. The other reason why I like Anchor is that you're able to record on the app. So you can download the app, see your stats on the app as well, but you can also record. So when we were in Malaysia, we recorded our podcast using my phone and the app. That was it. And the quality was amazing. Like I said, no one knew any different. You can also edit it as well, so you can add jingles in between, you can add different sounds. I hope that was helpful for anyone thinking about starting a podcast. It's definitely the best time to start a podcast right now. There's not a better time than starting a podcast right now. It's so easy, it's so accessible, it's so much fun as well. It's so nice to listen to your old podcast again. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give me a huge thumbs up, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye!